Chapter 1. Night full of light. The city breathed summer, damp and warm, as if covering the asphalt with a heavy velvet blanket. The streetlights flickered, as if they were not entirely sure whether they should illuminate the empty streets, where the evening had long since cooled down, giving way to the silence of the night. In the distance, sirens and the footsteps of rare passers-by echoed. Otherwise, everything was frozen. Alex and Sophie left the small café on the corner, where they had just spent several hours. Their cups were long empty, their conversations had turned to smiles, and inside there was still that aftertaste. Not from coffee but from closeness. He held her hand, his fingers intertwined as if instinctively, as if afraid that someone would try to separate them. They walked slowly, as if they were stretching out this way home, not wanting the night to end. Silhouettes were reflected in the shop windows, a couple, quietly walking level, step by step. The wind lifted the hem of Sophia's light dresses and ruffled Alex's hair, but they didn't notice. They only occasionally glanced at each other, eyes full of something that words couldn't say. "Look," she whispered, stopping for a second. There was a fallen chestnut lying on the sidewalk. Such a small, warm piece of autumn in the middle of summer. He smiled, picked it up and handed it to her without saying a word. She put it in the pocket of her jeans, as if it were a talisman, and stepped closer to him. They began to walk further, almost closely, shoulder to shoulder, as if the world around them had disappeared, until they turned the corner. It was at that moment that the city seemed to change its mask. There were no cozy lanterns here, no reflections of shop windows. Only dim light on the corner, cigarette smoke in the air, and someone's silhouettes ahead. 3. They stood sideways, 2 by the wall, 1 right in their path. From a distance it seemed like a chance meeting, but with each step it became clear. They were waiting. Not for someone. Just waiting. Sophie squeezed Alex's hand a little tighter. He slowed down. Inside him, a feeling was already awakening that could not be confused with anything. Not fear, not anger, but a mixture of icy concentration and quiet rage. There were no words yet. Only the night, the street, and the 3 who would soon begin to approach. And they really did begin. Chapter 2. Shadows of the street. The city at night lived its own special life, without the bustle of daytime noise, but with another, hidden pulsation. The streets, previously overcrowded with hurrying people and the ringing of trams, were now empty, illuminated only by the dim yellow light of rare street lamps. Reflections of neon signs were scattered across the asphalt, the wind stirred scraps of leaflets, and the air was filled with the smell of wet concrete and flowers forgotten in the windows of closed shops. Leo and Sophia walked slowly, unhurriedly, as if stretching out the last minutes of this evening. Their hands were clasped, their movements were synchronous. He was telling her something about an old film that he wanted to show her. She was laughing, tilting her head to his shoulder, and every word, every step fit into the serene picture of the moment, like frames of a film shot in the moonlight. But the idyll suddenly cracked. From the alley that crossed the street ahead, voices were heard. Rough, hoarse, growing louder with each step. 3. Silhouettes blurred in the semi-darkness, but movements were sharp, gestures aggressive. One tall, with a chain on his belt, another short, stooped, and the third, with a hood, hands in pockets. They walked towards each other, slowly, as if deliberately shortening the distance. Leo slightly squeezed Sophia's fingers. She felt how his palm tensed. He did not say a word, but she already understood. The moment of ease was over. "Hey, where are you going so cheerfully?" one of them called out, taking a step to the side. Leo took a half step forward, shielding Sophia with himself. His back seemed to grow, became wider. Firmness appeared in his voice. "We do not need to look for problems." But trouble seemed to have already found them. One of the guys had come too close, and now the smell of cigarettes and cheap alcohol mixed with someone else's insolence penetrated their breath. His hand twitched slightly, as if by accident, towards Leo's shoulder, like a tentacle. "We just wanted to say hello," he said sarcastically. "Why are you so tense?" Leo did not back down. His voice became lower, almost a whisper, but there was more steel in this whisper than in a scream. "This is the last time I warn you. What happens next is your choice." The seconds dragged on. Sophia did not move, although her heart was pounding somewhere in her throat. The world froze. Then a flash. One of the guys moved abruptly, and at the same moment Leo intercepted the movement, dodged, grabbed the attacker by the arm and sharply turned him around. He fell, not expecting resistance. The second one rushed towards them, but Leo had already stood between them like a shield. There were a couple more blows, shouts, a scuffle on the sidewalk, and suddenly everything went quiet. Those who wanted to make noise now retreated hastily, cursing and throwing angry glances. Leo stood in the light of the lantern, his chest heaving with his breath. There was a scratch on his hand, but he didn't pay attention. Sophia looked at him with wide-open eyes, not scared, but full of something else. Admiration? Pride? Or a feeling that was impossible to express in precise words. He approached her slowly, checking with his eyes whether she had been touched. Then he took her hand again, this time gently but firmly. "Everything is fine," he said, as if only now allowing himself to exhale. Sophia nodded, and they continued on their way, along the night street, already empty, like a stage after the final act. Chapter 3. After the storm. The city behind them was gradually turning into a city again. Not a threat, not a backdrop for a dramatic scene, but an ordinary space where people lived, taxis hurried and old street lamps smoked. But inside, everything was different. Something had shifted. The streets were the same, but the steps were different. They turned off the main avenue into a quiet neighborhood. There, the houses were closer together, as if hiding their inhabitants from the world. Warm light poured in from the windows, and sometimes you could see someone pouring tea at the table, a girl watching a movie wrapped in a blanket, someone hugging someone in the darkness of the kitchen. And none of this had anything to do with them, but at the same time it reminded them, safety exists. Leo did not let go of Sophia's hand, not because he was afraid that someone would appear from the darkness again, but because now he did not want, to lose this feeling of touch. As if through his fingers she felt, "I am near." And he through her palm, "I'm alive. I trust." They had no time for conversation. Words seemed unnecessary after he stood between her and danger. But the silence between them was not oppressive. On the contrary, it rang with truth. Sophia remembered how she trembled, not from fear, but from tension. She remembered how his shoulders tensed, how sharply and confidently he acted. There was no theater in his movements, only necessity and protection. When they approached her house, the street was almost empty. Light bulbs were burning above the entrances, air conditioners were humming. It smelled of dust and blooming lilacs that stretched from the front garden. Sophia stopped, not letting go of his hand. So much was raging inside her that not a single phrase seemed appropriate. Not "thank you," not "you saved me," not even "I was scared." All of this was too small compared to what had happened. She looked at him as if for the first time, not as someone who joked about her strange habits or made coffee at 3 in the morning, but as a person with inner strength, quiet but real. And in that second she understood. What had happened had changed not only their evening, it had shifted something in their relationship. It had erased the illusion of lightness, brought heaviness, but not in a bad way, more like seriousness. Leo ran his hand over her cheek, carefully, as if he were touching glass. And for the first time, she did not turn away from the touch, but on the contrary, leaned towards him, found in this gesture a shelter from the whole world. "Good night," he said finally, almost in a whisper, and he left without turning around. And Sophia stood in the doorway for a long time, pressing her hand to her chest, as if trying to keep inside what had just begun. As if she was afraid that if she closed the door, everything would disappear. But it didn't disappear. It remained in her fingers, in her breath, in every heartbeat. Chapter 4. Silence after thunder. Morning did not come immediately. It had been dragging on since the night had crumbled into a slow breath, dimly illuminated by the reflections of the streetlights on the wet asphalt. Sophia had not closed her eyes. Her body lay motionless, as if after a restless sleep, but her consciousness worked quietly and clearly, as if something inside was being rebuilt in a new way. The noise of the street remained somewhere below, behind the glass. It seemed as if the whole city had retreated, giving her space, not physical, but internal, almost sacred. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, and watched the morning awaken. The sky was ash gray, the houses were silent, like giants tired of the night's worries. Everything around seemed to exhale like her. Yesterday evening no longer felt like a nightmare, rather like a turn. Not abrupt, but imperceptible, but defining. He didn't just protect her, he did it as if there was a silent agreement between him and the fear. He didn't fight for her, he stood by her. He was just there when it mattered. She thought back to that moment again and again, to the way he stepped forward without asking, without hesitation. The way he stood between her and the shadow. The way he looked into the eyes of those who laughed. His gaze was calm, but not soft. There was something hard there, almost heavy. Something to hold on to when everything else was falling apart. Sophia suddenly realized. She had never really looked at him. Not like this. Her attention had always slid over the surface. Jokes, the way he spoke, habits. And now she saw depth in him. Not romantic, not bookish, but real. The kind that doesn't require words. The kind that gives you the silence in which you can be yourself. When the door to the apartment clicked softly, she wasn't surprised. As if she knew he would come. Without a message. Without a good morning. Just the way only he could. He walked in silently, holding 2 cups of coffee from their favorite little coffee shop on the corner. He walked confidently but slowly, as if giving her time to get used to his presence in a new sense. He didn't say a word. He just put the cup on the table, sat down opposite her, and looked. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was rich. It contained more than could be expressed in phrases like, "Are you okay?" Or "Is everything okay now?" It sounded like music without sounds. They both heard it. Sophia reached for the cup. The coffee was hot and smelled of cinnamon, just the way he remembered her liking. She smiled at the corner of her lips. He noticed, and nodded almost imperceptibly too. A warmth ran between them, subtle, almost invisible, but real. They talked. Later. Not right away. Slowly. Between sips of coffee and glances out the window. They didn't talk about hooligans or fear, but about how sometimes everything changes overnight. How the heart beats differently after a blow. How the world suddenly becomes a little closer and scarier at the same time. They didn't make promises to each other. They didn't talk about always. But in this kitchen, in this morning, in this silence, they both knew. What had happened would never disappear. Something was growing inside Sophia. Slowly, like a sprout breaking through concrete. A new rhythm. A new her.